Hey everybody, Trevor here with me, myself, and I, back with another interview with a great man, a great YouTuber that I had the joy of meeting and playing games with at Gen Con 2023. Please welcome to the program, Baron de Ropp of Dungeon Masterpiece. How are you, man?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for coming out to play today. It's
You're
good to have you
welcome.
here. I did an interview with Dave Thalmavor a little while ago, which just dropped on my channel
He's
a
a
couple
great
days
guy.
ago.
Yeah,
He is a great guy, and I said to
he's
him what I'll say to
fantastic. One of my
you.
favorite YouTubers.
He's fantastic. He's great. But I said to him what I'll say to you, which is when I met you guys at Gen Con, I
Uh-huh.
immediately felt like I knew you for years. It was just like
Really?
oh yeah, like I just felt we all spoke the same language, obviously.
Oh
We all
yeah,
had the
yeah.
same interests, but it was just like, oh yeah, no, I these guys are great. Like it was just instant
Yeah.
comfort. So,
Yeah, I was describing meeting everyone at Gen Con and because like one of one of my friends that I play D&D with that I haven't seen in like 2 months, she was like, "So how was Gen Con?" And I was like, "It was weird. It was like all of these people I was one meeting for the first time, but two had like it was like this fraternal grassroots team building corporate exercise thing. It felt like a work trip, but in the best possible way imaginable, if that makes sense. Like it was like, yeah, I work with all of these people. Like we do this like side hustle together. I don't know. It was like both a family reunion and a team building exercise, and like no negative, top down
yeah.
authoritarian corporate culture nonsense. It was just awesome people hanging out. I don't know. The vibe was like I came away so, especially after meeting like the mothership crew, which you were absolutely instrumentally a part of. No, like I came away from that con so energized. So
Yeah.
energized.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too. It was fantastic. And you, so for the
Time.
people who don't know, Baron ran a whole bunch of us in a game of Mothership, and it was as one would expect a Mothership game would go. It was total chaos, and most people died, and it was all good. But it was great because it was you were running it, and Professor Dungeon Master, and Kelsey Dion, and myself, and Ben Milton was there, and Steve Glicker was there. There was just like lots of really interesting people all just trying to kill each other. It was it was very
Oh
good.
yeah.
So I want to ask you about your channel. I'm a recent subscriber to you.
Okay.
First of all, how long have you been doing the channel? And this is the usual nonsense question you get in any interview. How long have you been doing the channel? What made you start?
So I got started in what year was it? It was the first year of the pandemic. And the pandemic really cleaned my calendar quite a bit. So that opened me up to actually have the mental bandwidth to seriously sit down and do it. Um, but I had been kicking around the idea of starting a channel since probably 2017, 2016, something like that. Now that being said, I'm glad I actually waited until 2020 because and especially like through to the later part, I think I started, it may have been June 2021 when I posted my first video, but I seriously started thinking about it and writing scripts and collecting who like thinking about like how I was going to present myself on YouTube and really trying to drill down on what I wanted to talk about um in 2020. But no, it was definitely something like the first person who really got me to think about rules almost as like a philosophy was Brandish Gilhelm from Runehammer.
Mm.
And I had like one of my favorite things to think about, because if you follow my content at all, you know that I talk about geopolitical world building as like that's one of my niches that I have carved out for myself on YouTube.
Yep.
But so I like to read a lot of philosophy, especially political philosophy. But it was the first time that I had been smacked in the face with, no, you can do this with games too. And that kind of just totally, because it went from just, oh, I'll talk about DMing advice, because at that time I had been DMing for 20 years, and sure, I had a lot of DM advice to give, but it wasn't really anything new. I would have just been recycling everyone else's content. So Brandish Gilhelm Runehammer really opened up my mind to thinking about rules as system and philosophy, and the implication of how that interaction between player and DM, player and rule, DM and rule, really modifies the way we think about the game. So, I'm sure we'll get a lot of keyboard warriors down in the comments that talk about system doesn't matter.
Oh,
and
that's
they're right,
a lie.
But it all...
They're wrong.
Yeah. They're wrong.
I think the system is hugely important, but maybe not for the reasons that a lot of people think. I think that system, the mechanics with which you engage in the game, are the mechanics through which you engage the world. And so for me, the mechanics
100%.
are as much atmosphere as they are mechanical, because there's a feel to a D20 that's very different to the feel of a percentile dice. That's very different to the feel of a dice pool system. These are all just, not only do they feel physically different in your hands when you're rolling actual dice, but there's just a way of thinking. You almost have to rewire your brain a little bit when you're trying to interpret those results. So I think system is a
100%.
huge thing.
No, 100%. I completely agree. And it really starts to get interesting and noodly. Like, there is a certain emotional response that I have noticed with, like, go play, for example, Maze Rats or World of Dungeons, which is a 2d6 system, and then compare that to playing any like old school retro clone of D&D. Like, they're basically the same as far as like the feeling of the game and what they're trying to accomplish, but just the tactile nature of the dice being different feels different at the table. And there's a like there, because a D20 is swingier, you will find that players are just a little bit more daring than on a 2d6 system, but 2d6s are more fun to roll. There's something different about, like, there's something primally visceral about that connect us to our ancestors when they were first carving d6s out of bone. Like, there's something viscerally primal out of
mammoth tusks.
Out of mammoth tusks. It's radically different than what you get out of a dodecahedron. It's very interesting because the technology to create a dodecahedron is far more advanced than what's required to make a d6. But to make a cube, but the visceral feeling is much more wild and freeform out of a D20 than it is predictable out of 2d6. That's just a fascinating dichotomy there. But anyway, what were we talking about?
Just this. We were talking about this, talking about all this. It doesn't really matter. One thing leads to another. I do a series on the channel called The Sage's Library, where I talk about my experience playing all these games over the 40 odd years I've been doing this. And one of the games I talked about was GURPS. Right?
You're very handsome. You're a very handsome young man.
Thank you very much, young man. You're very kind, young man. Well, I just shaved, so it takes like 30 years off of my face. So I did a Sage's Library on GURPS, and a GURPS, of course, is 3d6, roll under, and you want to roll low. And what's fascinating about that for me, and I talk about this in the video, is that, if you look at a game like Traveler, which is a 2d6 game, and that's still a bell curve, it's not quite as predictable a bell curve as a 3d6 is. But for me, I have no problem with 2d6. Additive, right? Atom compared to a target number, no problem. But as soon as I add that third D6 in there, my brain looks at the three numbers and just has a little hiccup. I'm not super strong with numbers, so I see that third number and I go, what? What? And that's just enough to impair my pace as a GM. And that is ultimately why I never played GURPS for very long, because I was like, I can't.
That's interesting.
I literally can't.
That's so interesting. Because, I stopped playing GURPS because, for being a radically simple system, it is also exceedingly crunchy at the same time, which is just ludicrous.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's all the options, right? All the things you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's too freeform. Like if you're gonna be that freeform, just gut it. You know, like just
It,
go FKR. I feel like I don't know.
so, judging by your channel, I would have assumed that you were
Yeah.
mostly like a 5e guy, and yet when we talk, and you ran a game of Mothership, which certainly has nothing to do with 5e. Yet when we talk now, your knowledge of mechanics is very thorough. So, what is your relationship to D&D versus all of the other games out there?
So when you say D&D, do you mean like through fifth
Yes.
edition,
No,
or
I
do
mean
you mean
legitimately Dungeons and
like
Dragons, and I guess
yes?
we can lump all of the clones in there too, right? Because they're
Okay.
all ultimately the same.
I mean, they're all the same. Feel free to at me in the comments, grognards. Um, but but no. So so my relationship with is when I was 9 years old, I started playing second edition. And not to beat a dead horse because I've said this in a few different interviews, but what I really so well let's go back to the origin story because this is a fun story. Okay, so I started playing when I was 9 years old in middle school, and well, how it started was Magic the Gathering. I had sat, homeroom class. There's these kids playing Magic. What's that? That's not spades. That's not hearts or euchre. Like that's weird. Those are cool looking cards, and this is back in like Mirage Block, right? So now you know exactly how old I am, even though I just said I was 9 at the time. I had friends give me a couple of cards and I built this completely crap deck out of commons, but I was in middle school and I didn't know any better. We were just playing. And I asked my mom to take me to a game store called Game Board. And so she obliged, and I found out begrudgingly later because I found out that my mother thought that Magic the Gathering was Dungeons and Dragons. And we live in the South, and there's still at the time there was still quite a bit of residual satanic panic lingering in the air.
Right.
And like that's not to say that like we were deeply religious by any stretch of the imagination at all. My family was relatively secular, and but my mom still had this at least a superstition of it. So she begrudgingly bought these cards for me, thinking that I was making a pact with the devil or something. And it's funny because like our second or third trip to Game Board was the name of the store. That's when I bumped into this Sailor Moon RPG, and I didn't know what it was. So like it just had the Sailor Scouts on the cover, and it was a book, and it said it was a game. And that's cool because I was 9 years old and I watched Sailor Moon, and I'm not an anime fan, but it was on. I watched Sailor Moon. I was a fan, so I got my mom to get me that book, which she was ecstatic, more than happy to do because it was not of the devil. So I brought that back and played it a little bit in homeroom with my friends, and we would talk about it during class change or whatever. And that's when another friend of mine said, "Okay, you think that game is cool? Let me show you the real deal, Dungeons and Dragons." And he brought his second edition books in and let me borrow them over the weekend. And like I just poured over these books. It was mind blowing to me. And like we tried to play it with my friends, and I tried to play it. We played at D&D like we had no idea what we were doing. What the hell is a Thaco? Like we didn't know what that was.
All sounds very
but,
familiar.
yeah, exactly. And I remember like 6 months later when like the light bulb went off in my head and I finally understood like that's how you calculate a Thaco, and I was 10 years old. So shame on you adults who can't figure it out on your own. But anyway, that's when my mom came into my room and like saw that these were actually legit Dungeons and Dragons books, and was that's when I found out that she thought that Magic was D&D and that it was of the devil. But by then I think she realized all I was doing was drawing dungeon maps. Like there's nothing satanic about drawing dungeon maps. The weekend was over and I had to take the books back to my friend, and he took them home with him. And the following day, he came back and brought the books with him and said, "Okay, so my dad bought me these books, and I found out it was because, and his parents were divorced. My dad bought these books for me because he wanted to troll my mom." I mean, I don't remember exactly what he said, but obviously not the word troll, but like that was the gist. The father was trying to troll the mother. The mother was very religious, thought they were of the devil, and said, "You've got to get rid of these books, throw them away." So he feigned throwing them away, and rather than just dumping them in a bin, he brought them to me and said, "Do you want them?" Well, hell yeah, I want them. So anyway, I still have the books, and I can't remember the kid's name. But if you recognize me, thank you. They're still in good ward. Doesn't matter. I still have them. They are kept up, and occasionally I crack them open and read through them, fondly thinking about them. But no, so many hours poured over making BS dungeons that have no business ever seeing the light of day, stuff like that. It's great.
Oh, so yeah, again, very familiar.
Yeah, high school started. 3.5 happened. Made lots of cool magic items with, if I had this much gold, I would build this magic item. That was fun. That was 3.5 for what it was. Completely skipped 4th edition, and not because people said 4th edition was bad. It was just I took a turn in my life, got married, moved on. I was in another relationship, and D&D just kind of fell out of the wayside for me. And it wasn't until the rumors of 5th edition started popping back up, and I just heard about it from other people that were talking about how we're never going to move off of 3rd edition. We have all these 3rd edition books. 5th edition is a scam. 4th edition was terrible. 5th edition is going to be worse. Nah, that was the mood. I played as a player in a 3rd edition campaign for about a year, something like that, and that was the only time I played. So I might have 30 sessions of player in me in my entire 29 years of playing D&D. But then I got into 5th edition. I gathered up a few people from work and just started there. Started back into the hobby, and it was right when I guess I had played 5th edition for about 2 years, and that's when I bumped into Brandish Gilhunt, and maybe 3 years or so. And it was at that time that I really started to think critically about 5th edition itself and comparing it to 2nd edition. And that's when the floodgates opened. I was like, okay, I've got to sit down and actually read reread the rules in all the different editions and think about them philosophically. I started getting into the OSR super heavy at that point. There were certain scenes in the indie game scene that rubbed me the wrong way. I just didn't like there was a certain rules as culture that I didn't, it just didn't jive with me. I have this love-hate relationship with Fate Core that it's so poorly written, yet it's like reading Hegel. It's so poorly written yet so profound that
that could be the best description of Fate I've ever heard. Actually, that's right on the button.
Terrible.
That's
it
right
is
on the money.
Completely lacking any self-awareness. But once you read it 6 times and play the rule set for 6 months with people who really start to get it, it's wonderful. But it takes so much chewing on leather and eating bitter herbs to get there. It's not. It's so.
I never
hard.
got past a Spirit of the Century, which was one of the very first Fate games. And I remember I thought, I'm gonna try this out, and I looked at it, and that book, good luck figuring that one out if you have no background in Fate. And I'm a system guy, man. I've played virtually every game that ever was, you know what I mean? And this thing, I was like, what? And to this day, I've dabbled in different flavors of Fate, but it always leaves me cold. I've tried it many times. I've tried to come back to it, but in any game that I don't like, there's always something I do, right? I don't hate games, but
Yeah.
even games that I know I'll not play and they're not up my alley, there's still things in it that I really like. And Fate, the thing I like about it is probably the most fundamental thing to it, which is not aspects or the fate point economy. I quite hate all those, actually. The thing I like is, very simply, the 4DF. The fact you roll 4 fate dice and it gives you this really predictable bell curve. And I'm not even really a bell curve guy, but for some reason that was really appealing to me, that you've got these finite results and your skill set is very limited as well. So again, it goes back to what we were saying about how each dice system is a very particular feeling. And so that's what I liked about Fate. But everything else I was like, nah, no, nope.
It's funny you say that, because like I think the bitter herb that you eventually learn to eat and enjoy is the aspect system. But it only works if you're sitting down with players who are all like late night comedy joke writers. That's the only way it works. Like, can I take two unrelated news articles and just word cloud them until I find funny connections between them to create a punchline? Like that is how late night comedy television does their monologue jokes. Before, like, that's how Jay Leno has ever done it. It's how Conan has ever done it. It's how who does it? Jimmy Fallon. That's how they all do it. And that's how you have to play Fate. It's like, I have these two unrelated aspects. Can I make them relate to one another? And if you can do that, you're gonna kill it. The game is gonna be a blast. But 99.9% of people can't think that way. So
yeah, and it's also
that sucks.
when I ran it for my old group, this is a long time ago, and I ran some fantasy version of it. I think it was Legends of Anglaire, I think, was the fantasy version of it, which again, on paper, I really liked it. I was like, I think I can do this. This is great. I got excited about it, because I always get excited about running a new game. And then I put it to my guys, and we played it, and there was a moment, and my guys are, they've played every game with me, so they're very good with systems. They get things very quickly, but they're also, like me, they kind of lean simulationist, right? We're more sort of like that side of things, but I've introduced them to all kinds of crazy narrativist stuff and all that kind of stuff. But when we sat down to play Fate, there was a moment where my friend Ross, his character, they were in this valley or something, and they were going to be ambushed, and there was like 3 bandits that showed up on a hill, and so he said, I huck a knife at them. And he rolled so well that according to the rules, he took them all out. So I said to him, as you're supposed to do in Fate, at least in the Legends of Anglaire, tell me how you do it. And he said, what? He said, I threw a knife and killed 3 guys? I said, apparently. And he said, okay. I said, so what does that look like? And he said, you tell me. Do your damn job. You're the GM. And I laughed and laughed and laughed. And I've remembered that to this day.
That was wonderful.
So, needless to say, we won't be going back to Fate anytime soon.
Yeah. No, I always say Fate is like a good academic journal article to read. It's a good academic journal article to read that never passed peer review.
You are going to get
an editor would have set that back.
You are just like filling up the comment section with all of the Fate fanboys right now. They are just furiously, how dare you say
whatever. Wait until we talk about Critical Role.
Don't get me started, as I think you know. So let me ask you this question: during the time you were playing D&D, and even up until your sort of hiatus, were you aware of other game systems out there, and you just didn't play them, or were you unaware that such a thing existed other than D&D?
I mean, so yeah, my first game was the Tri-Stat system, Big Eye, Small Mouth, Big Robots, Cool Starships, Hot Rods and Gun Bunnies, the Sailor Moon RPG. Like, that was where it started.
Of course.
And I still have like a really weird fondness to that game. And like I've looked at like 2nd and 3rd edition versions of that game, and I don't like it as much. I'd rather play 1st edition. Perhaps it's nostalgia, but I liked how crunchy character creation was and how simple gameplay was, if that makes sense. Like, it just got all the crap out of the way during gameplay, but it was really fun and mathy during character creation, which was a blast. But I would go into the game store and poke around and look at the books. I was kind of aware that there was other stuff besides D&D, but it wasn't until about 2015, 2017, I guess. 2015, really. Yeah. I guess it was a year or two after 5th edition came out that I finally was like, okay, well, I'm gonna get into all these other games, mostly in the OSR, which is really just one game, but it's, exploring the creativity, really.
So, what is it, do you think, about that base system, that base OSR system? Because again, as I said, they're all just suffusions of basic D&D, essentially.
Sure. Yeah.
So what is it about that keeps you coming back to that? Because I know for me, I gave up on D&D basically in the mid-'80s when I discovered, MERPS, Rollmaster, Warhammer, RuneQuest, all the other ones. And I just thought these systems do what I want to explore in the game mechanically much, much better than what D&D does. And it's not a knock against D&D. D&D did, I mean, it introduced me to the hobby, and obviously I'll be eternally grateful. But for me, I can't even imagine going back to D&D because it feels primitive in a way. It feels like a straitjacket for me because my use of mechanics are so so superior. No, they're so they're so expanded now after all these years that, like, even now, I tried to run a 5e game a couple years back right before the pandemic, and I did. I ran Fandelver for a few people, and I had all the same problems with 5th edition that I had with every other edition. I was like, you know what? Nothing's changed. It's all the same, But obviously, you've stuck with it, so I'm just curious, is there a particular reason?
I think I find myself moving into the more of the odd-like NSR scene, which is even a sub-branch of the OSR. So, like, we're talking super niche now. And for anybody listening that doesn't know, NSR stands for New School Revolution, which is, cutting out the crap of like all these extraneous stats. Like, you only have 3: strength, dex, and willpower or will. You get rid of intelligence, and the only reason those are there even is because of saves. Like, the idea of making a check is like, you're only ever going to make a check if something bad is going to happen if you don't succeed. So they call them saves. Like, you're never trying to make a check. Checks just happen. So there's that as a mentality. And I also just really like how modular, by stripping away everything, I really like how modular everything is. Shadow Dark gets really close to what I want in a game because it's got, classes and roles, and characters have specific abilities. Cairn is what I use for team building exercises at work. And I've also done that with a couple of different companies around town. I tried to get into that at the beginning of the pandemic, and I just didn't give it my all, so it never really went anywhere. Like, team building as a service using D&D. Cairn is really great for that. But no, I like, even like 0th edition and BX and old school essentials, I find to be clunky. So yeah, OSR, but that's only because there's such a wealth of creativity and ideas that you can play around in, and really get inspired by in the OSR. And I think it's more of the culture and the community that I'm drawn to than actually the rules of OSR, because if that makes sense. I think by having such a modular rule set that is cross-compatible, whether it doesn't matter if you're playing 0th or basic or first or any of the hacks like black hack or white hack or what is it, I think there's a blue hack out there that somebody published. There's white box, 2 different white boxes.
Now there's black sword hack, which is like the Ulrich version.
Exactly. Like, take your pick of whichever tuned version you want. They all kind of interrelate. They're all cross-compatible enough to streamline with each other. And as a result, because they're such a tight-knit family of games, there is this internal dialogue. There's this internal culture that's all because of the cross-compatibility. You get to share a lot of ideas. It's like everybody's agreeing to speak English in the West, So we get to experience all the ideas from UK and English speaking Europe and America and Canada and Australia and now, various other English speaking countries. So you get all of these ideas from all these other would-be different games, whereas if you were to go to something like Fate Core only works with Fate. People who do homebrew stuff only works with Fate. So you don't get to experience, like, you can go look up Cyberpunk Red modules and get some ideas, but it's just nowhere near as cross-compatible. So I think the cross compatibility of all those retro clones and spin-off acts fosters that sensation, that cultural sensation.
That's a really interesting point. The idea that it due to the mechanics and the mechanical similarities, it really does help to create a community that can freely interchange and exchange modules and house rules and stuff, and it's all more or less going to work. That is interesting. I mean, that is something I will confess that having played every other game under the sun, you don't really get. Like there's not a lot of people out there who are like, hey, try out my Rollmaster hack where we, get rid of 80 of the classes, for example. But so yeah, that's an interesting point. Now, on your channel, do you talk mostly about 5e, or do you talk about, because I know you do geopolitical stuff, which is really cool. But do you always couch it in 5e, or do you just couch it as sort of a general game world design kind of stuff?
So the open secret of my channel is I am trying to teach 5th edition players that you can pull a lot of old school D&D sensibilities into your 5th edition game to improve it. I find that the monster condo, the encounter building, the lack of encounter building advice in the DMG, which I'm getting ready to do a whole series of like everything wrong with the 5th edition DMG because it's awful. But like there's so many poor lessons learned from a complete negligence on the part of Wizards of the Coast and what they put in the DMG, as well as the lessons that people are just trying to absorb from other RPGs in the world, and they don't really, it's clear to me that they don't, and this is not their fault. Like they're doing what they can with what they got, but they're trying to pull lessons from other RPG video games, and it just doesn't work unless unless you really step back and think like, why does it work in a video game? How can I make that mechanic work at the table? A lot of that stuff does not translate, but a lot of it does. But it's hard to know which ones actually translate. So, and I feel like the OSR in some respects has figured quite a bit of that stuff out. So there's a lot of that I pull in. Geopolitical world building was actually just an accident. I do that for risk management for my day job, and I just started talking about it because I thought it was interesting. Next thing you know, here I am, the guy doing it. But just how to just take inspiration and not just from video games. I've talked about a few different movies on my channel as well, but like cinema, literature. I wanted to get into literature, but I don't think it would translate. I mean, let's be frank, nobody really reads anymore. So
it's a tragedy. You're right. It is a tragedy, but yes.
But there's a lot of lessons, and just from different kinds of media that we can pull into D&D to make it to improve our game telling, so our storytelling in our games.
Well, that's cool, man. I really like when I see YouTubers that are focusing on something that everybody else isn't doing. Because as you say, everybody and their dog can say, hey, here's my advice for how to run a D&D game. Make sure you roll dice and you eat chips and blah, blah, blah. So, which is fine. I'm sure that's all valuable advice. But so I like when I see channels like yours, or even like Dan over at Dungeon Craft. He really narrows in on things that I think are important, because he is all about like getting to the meat of your game. You know, he's
Yeah.
all about that, which is interesting because I'm not about that. I'm really a system guy. You know, like I love my systems. It's interesting. I found on my channel, my main show, the solo thing I do. I used a very complex system for the third season, and I was really excited about that at the beginning. But I wound up having to cut out so much of it in the actual final because otherwise you're watching a guy do math for 30 seconds and it's like okay, all right, come on, we gotta
let's get to the story here, buddy.
yeah so then again, what I do is very different. I wouldn't even call myself an actual play channel. I'm more of like a TV show channel.
right
So,
that's funny.
It was actual plays. Let's not get into certain topics you and I have already discussed over too many glasses of wine.
Too many bottles of wine, more like.
Oh God. Yeah, that's it for me. I'm out. Well, listen, man, I actually gotta cut it short. I've got another project I have to finish. So this was great. Let's do this again because I think we've only scratched the surface.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Warmed up.
Cool, man. Yeah. Is there anything you want to plug?
Not really. Not off the top of my head.
No problem. I wouldn't have anything either.
Yeah.
It's just, I get asked that in interviews for like my voice work all the time. Is there anything you want to talk about? And I'm always like, I can't talk about it. NDAs. What do you want from me?
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway. All right. Well, thanks, man. This was super awesome. And we'll do it again real soon.
All right, man. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Ciao.